Hi, I'm Johnny. This is Johnny Likes, the show where I talk about movies that I like. Today I'm talking about a lovely action-adventure film from the late 90s called The Mummy.
You tell him, Johnny. You tell the world.
This is a great turn off your brain and just enjoy it movie. It's a Hollywood Blockbuster popcorn film of the highest order. It moves along at a very brisk pace, and it moves from action set piece to action set piece without ever feeling rushed. The action is thrilling, and I basically had a smile on my face throughout the whole movie. There was lots of chases, booby traps, and some great shoot-'em-up stuff. I also found it incredibly refreshing that for once in an action movie, a character realized that shooting the immortal enemy wasn't doing anything and actually switched tactics. That's so rare in a Hollywood action movie, and it's a giant pet peeve of mine that you see over and over again. I saw this in theaters when I was 13 or 14, and I've loved it ever since. I think it has the perfect mix of action, adventure, comedy, and horror. And I've loved Egyptian lore ever since I saw the DuckTales Treasure of the Lost Lamp in the theaters when I was quite young. I also think that the 1920s time period that The Mummy is set in is perfect for this type of adventure film. I like to think that The Mummy takes place in the same cinematic universe as the Indiana Jones films. They share so many common elements. The swashbuckling male lead, the archaeology element, the early 20th century setting, the fudging of cultural myths and history, the supernatural element, and the mashup of action, adventure, comedy, and horror. Now, I always liked the Indiana Jones movies, but I never loved them. I didn't grow up with them, so I don't have the same reverence for them that other people might. I think that The Mummy is my Indiana Jones, which makes a bunch of sense. I was the target audience, and I was at a perfect age to fully enjoy The Mummy when it was initially released. There's plenty of comedy in The Mummy, by the way, and it lands pretty solidly for the most part.
It looks to me like I've got all the horses.
Hey, Benny! Looks to me like you're on the wrong side of the river!
And I can't help but wonder if James Gunn was a big fan of this movie. Guardians of the Galaxy and the larger MCU use comedy in much the same way that The Mummy does. What I mean by this is that they often add a joke or a punchline to offset an otherwise serious situation. Take Jonathan's joke right here, right after a man has had a scarab crawl up under his skin and eat his brain.
Len Livett, 12 years old. Well, he may have been a stinky fella, but he had good taste.
This trick of adding a joke to lighten the mood is used throughout the whole film, and it works very well. It wasn't until I seriously started examining the film that I noticed that that's what they were doing, and how similar it was to what the MCU would go on to do in later years. And I would bet that young fans raised on Marvel films would find a lot to love in this movie. It is a bit older, but I think it's aged great and doesn't feel dated at all. And for me, it does feel very much like a prototype as for what Marvel would go on to do to much success. So this movie never feels like a horror movie, but it easily could have been a scary film. All you'd have to do is amp up the gore a bit and turn the comedy a few shades darker, and you got yourself a scary movie. Having a resurrected mummy feeding off the flesh of the living, that's a pretty decent premise for a horror movie. After all, we do see some pretty horrific stuff happen to people in this movie. As I mentioned earlier, a man gets his brain eaten by a bug. Another man gets his tongue and eyes eaten by the mummy. A couple guys get burned alive with an acid booby trap. And Imhotep in general is just pretty frightening to look at until he's in his fully human form. With the emphasis placed on scariness rather than exhilaration, this could have been a great horror movie, in fact. So is this film historically accurate? God, no. Do I care? Not especially. Does it bug history nerds? Probably. The screenwriters cherry-picked actual Egyptian historical elements and just melded them together however they saw fit. Imhotep was a real person, but he didn't live in the time that they say he did, and his job wasn't high priest. It was as an engineer in a consulate. Anaxamun, real person, not the same time, and she was a princess, not a concubine. So I can only assume that any of the names or locations chosen for this movie were purely for the cool aspect. They either sounded cool or looked cool. And I'm kind of okay with this. Whenever possible, I prefer stuff to be historically accurate, but this is the type of movie where elements are chosen because they're gonna make a good story, not for their realism. And I'm sure that there's actual Egyptologists out there right now who got into the field specifically because of this movie. So in this case, I can forgive the historical inaccuracies. The special effects in this movie were great for the time. 20-some years later, they still look pretty good. The effects that haven't aged terribly well didn't pull me out of the movie or anything, they just look like early CGI. None of it was all that distractingly bad. It came out the same year as The Phantom Menace, and it's on par with that, if not better at points. I only have the minorest of quibbles with the movie. While the Egyptian historical pillaging didn't really bother me, they could have done a better job with it. They could have either chose fictitious characters, or they could have at least chose characters who lived at the same time. I'm not expecting much in this type of movie, but everyone was really boiled down to one or two character traits. Evelyn, she's smart and clumsy. O'Connell, he's an uneducated Indiana Jones. Jonathan, he's a dandy. Benny, he's a weasel.
I think I'll kill you.
Think of my children.
You don't have any children.
Someday I might.
Shut up.
Like, broad strokes, I get it. But they could have thrown a curveball or two into the mix when writing these people. So overall, the movie is great. It's one of my favorite Hollywood blockbusters from the late 90s. It's got a great cast, cool story, cool action, great effects for the time. And the actors all have really good chemistry on screen, and you can tell that they probably got along in real life. Just overall, this was a very well done and enjoyable movie, and it's aged great. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. So what do you guys think about The Mummy? What do you want to see me talk about next? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you could do me a favor and like and subscribe, that'd be outstanding. Thanks for watching me talk about movies for a little bit, and you can tune in next time to see what else Johnny likes.